member, Dr. Zubaida Haque. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
I mean, do you think that we need to be properly reflecting on this June 21st date? Would you like to see that scrapped at this stage?
It's not about seeing it scrapped. It's about having a plan. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things that Dominic Cummings did say, putting aside, of course, the whole political mess and his feelings about Matt Hancock, is he said, of course, that the whole administration was plagued by bad policy, bad decisions, bad planning and bad operational capability. And I would argue, Stephen, that hasn't changed at all. We still don't have a COVID plan, a virus suppression plan from this government. And that's why everything's being left late. I feel so bad for businesses at the moment. But it's not just businesses, it's the whole population. I mean, we've been in lockdown for many months, and that's had a mental health toll. The other thing is Stephen, we didn't pass the third stage of the roadmap. The third stage of the roadmap had 4 tests. And the 4th test said that if there were any variants of concerns, if there were any risks posed by any variants of concern, we should pause. And yet the government went ahead, knowing everything that they did about the B1617.2 so-called Indian variant. We know it spread considerably across the country. I think it's in over 150 areas. We know, of course, that there are high hotspots like Bolton, Blackburn with Darwin, Leicester, and so on. I mean, the government is still taking an ad hoc whack-a-mole response to this virus instead of having a plan and strategy to suppress the virus.
I mean, they would argue there is a virus suppression program, which, I mean, is primarily driven by the vaccination scheme. I mean, what sort of suppression program do you think should be in place?
You can't just have a vaccination program and nothing else, because if you allow the virus to rip, and I'm quoting Boris Johnson's words here, if you allow that to happen, then what happens is the virus is more likely to mutate. The more opportunity it has to spread, even if it spreads among younger people who are slightly less likely to end up in hospital, the more opportunity it has to spread, the more likely it will mutate, and the more likely it will have some vaccine escape. And we know that. We know that about the so-called Indian variant, that while at the moment 2 doses is quite effective against the vaccine, 1 dose is only 33% effective. So there is some vaccine escape. And that's happened because the government didn't have a strong border policy. They didn't quarantine everybody. They had this red list, which was porous and which basically waited until the virus was in before they put a country on the red list. And we don't have a robust test, trace and supported self-isolation policy. There is absolutely no point in testing unless you help people to self-isolate. And that's been the weakest part of this government strategy, and they still haven't recognised that.
OK, so where does that leave us now, though? I mean, whether that, you know, the funding issues and that will be looked at again, we just don't know. But in terms of the sort of scientific perspective, what do you think we need to do now? I mean, are we looking at another lockdown? Is that something you'd like to see? I mean, just till we get this variant under control?
I mean, lockdown, I think what we want to avoid is this whole, you know, lockdown, release, full opening. Like, it doesn't have to be those extremes. We could have mild restrictions again. One of the biggest issues at the moment is we've opened allowed all indoor mixing. Now, indoor mixing is a huge problem when we're at this critical juncture, where we have a variant, the so-called Indian variant, which is much more transmissible, which has some vaccine escape, where we don't have a very good test trace and supported isolation strategy. At this moment, we need to restrict indoor mixing. And the reason we should do that, just for the next 2 weeks, waiting for more, next couple of weeks before June the 21st, waiting for more data in, is because then we're much more likely to be able to open soon. I mean, this is the repeated mistake that this government have made. You know, Dominic Cummings talked about this, that they dithered and delayed, and they followed their natural herd immunity policy. And to some extent, Stephen, I would argue that none of that has gone. They're still doing it. They're still leaving it till last minute when lockdowns, when they leave it last minute when it's so inevitable that we end up having longer lockdowns. So pause now, restrict indoor mixing, have that strong border quarantine, set up a test, trace and supported isolation policy. Give it to the local directors. They're much better than this centralised, privately led system. All of that needs to be done. And yes, it means that we can't go out and do everything we want right now. But if we just wait a little bit longer, we can have that freedom, if you like.
Dr. Haque, good to talk to you. Thank you.